Hey guys, uh, what am I doing? Oh yeah, I'm doing a video for my first and second grade religion class. But what video am I making? Oh yeah, I'm making a video about the absent-minded saint, Saint John the Dwarf. His feast day is on October the 17th. Saint John the Dwarf lived in the 5th century. I know these centuries are confusing, but the 5th century means that period of 100 years in which all the years begin with 4, not with 5. You would think 5th century is years like 560 or 520, but it's really 460 and 420. And St. John the Dwarf lived in the 5th century in the land of Egypt, in Africa. When he was a very young man, he went out into the desert, like a lot of young men and old men were doing in those days, to try to get closer to God. He wanted to be a hermit. That means he wanted to live all alone by himself. And most of the hermits who lived out in the desert in those days either lived in a little hut or they lived in a cell in a compound with other hermits, or sometimes they lived in caves. The idea was that they wanted to become holy. They wanted to focus their minds on God and not on other things, spend their time in prayer and not be distracted. So St. John went out into the desert to become a hermit. And usually when you were a beginning hermit, you had an old master who would sort of take you under his wing and teach you the ways of being a hermit. And St. John's old master, the old hermit that was in charge of directing him, when he began, said, he told him to take a walking stick. You know, a walking stick is like a cane that an old person or a person journeying can lean on. He said, take this walking stick and go out and plant it in the sand, and then go get water and water it. And I want you to do that every day until it bears fruit. So St. John took the walking stick and he went out into the sand and he planted it into the sand, and he went down to the river, which was really, really far away, and he got some water and he brought it back and he watered this walking stick. And he did that day after day after day. Every day he would walk far, far away to the river, he would get water, and he would go to the walking stick and water it. He never asked why, and he never forgot to water it, and he never complained. And in the 3rd year, the walking stick put down roots and put out shoots and leaves and bore fruit. And the old hermit gathered the fruit in his garments and brought it into the church and handed it out to the brethren who were in the church. And he said, this is the fruit of obedience. Take it and eat. This is one of the virtues that hermits and monks and friars and other people who live together, priests and brothers who live together in a Christian community today, learn the virtue of obedience, which means do what the people who are in charge of you ask you to do without complaining and without asking why. And this is a virtue that all of us, teachers and students, can cultivate, right? Especially right now, when there are a lot of frustrations with living at home, you can make life easier for your parents by cultivating this obedience, which will bear fruit. Even if it isn't literal fruit, it will bear the fruit of good things in your life. And we teachers, we have to obey too. Parents have to obey their bosses. Everyone has somebody that we have to obey, and we all have to obey God. This tree that bore the fruit of obedience lived for many, many years, and travelers wrote about seeing it there in the desert, and you could sit under it in its shade. It was so old and wonderful. St. John's belief, his central belief, was that a monk should watch over himself constantly, and that he should have God always present in his mind. Well, watching over himself constantly and always present in his, keeping God always present in his mind and in his thoughts tended to make him more and more absent-minded, and he became famous for this. He never talked about news and never chatted with people about the things that were going on in the world. He just prayed all the time and became more and more absent-minded. One of the jobs that he would have to do, because as well as just sitting there and praying, monks did various kinds of jobs. They would tend gardens, but his job was basket weaving, and he would take reeds and he would weave baskets about them. But he was so absent-minded, praying so hard and keeping God before his mind all the time, that sometimes he would take twice the amount of reeds that would go into one basket and fit them into one basket, so the basket was all misshapen and packed with too many reeds. One day, another monk that they called a carrier, who monks would send, monks or hermits would send out to get things from other monks if they needed them. A carrier knocked at his door, and he asked him to get some things, and St. John went away to get them, and when he went away to get them, he forgot what he had been sent away to get. So he came back to the door and asked the carrier again what he had been sent away to get, and then he went away to get them, and he forgot again what he had been sent away to get. He came back to the carrier and apologized and asked him again, and the carrier told him again, and he went away and forgot what he was supposed to get for him. So he came back and he asked again, and this time, as he was going away to get what he was sent to get, he decided to keep repeating to himself what it was that he was going to get. So as he walked away, he said, "The camel, my tools. The camel, my tools. The camel, my tools. The camel, my tools," until he did get the camel and his tools and brought them back to the carrier. When people would come to get his baskets, he would go inside to get the baskets for them, and he would forget that he was supposed to get the baskets and bring them out to the carrier. So he would just sit down and start working on the baskets again. And this happened so many times that eventually he started asking the brothers to please come in and get the baskets for themselves, because otherwise he would forget to bring them out to him. He was such a peaceful and godly man that people absolutely loved to converse with him. They loved to talk to him all the time. And one time, a young man, a young hermit, came just to talk to him for a few minutes and began to talk to him. And they talked and talked, and the talking was so wonderful that they stayed up all night just standing there and talking. And then they began to see that the morning was coming. And so St. John said, let me walk you a few steps towards your cell. So he walked with the young hermit a few steps towards his cell, and as they began walking, they started talking again. And after just a few steps, they stopped walking, but they kept talking. So they stood in one place and talked for the whole morning. And finally, they realized that they'd done it again, and that they'd spent not only the whole night, but the whole morning just standing there talking. And finally, the young man left and went home. Towards the end of his life, St. John found a young woman who had been a very good woman but had started leading a bad life. And he went to see her. And he asked her, when he went in and was admitted to her presence and sat down, he said, "What reason do you have for abandoning Jesus?" She was silent and didn't say anything. And in the silence, he started weeping. He started crying. And she said, "Why are you crying?" And St. John said, "How can I not cry? I see Satan is in possession of your heart. Of course that makes me cry." So then she began to cry, and she said, "Will God take me back if I'm sorry and I try to live my life in a good way again?" And St. John said, "Yes, he will." And Paisia, that was her name, she said, "Show me the way." So they got up and left the house and started out on a journey through the desert to her old home. And when the night came, they lay down and put their heads on mounds of sand, which served them as pillows. And they slept. And in the middle of the night, St. John had a dream. He dreamed that he saw her soul going to heaven. And a voice came to heaven and said, "Men may not think that her sorrow for what she did is very much, but God finds it to be perfect. And after this dream, he woke up and he looked at the girl, Paisia, next to him, and he saw that in the night she had died, and her soul had been taken to heaven. When St. John was very old, he went to the first hermitage, the first monastery that had been founded by the first hermit, St. Anthony of Egypt, some time ago. And he became sick, and it was obvious that he was dying. And so as he was dying, some of the younger hermits crowded around, and they said, "Tell us something before you go. Give us a lesson." And St. John, who was very sick by this time, thought for a while, and he said, "I never followed my own will. I always did what I was supposed to do, and I never asked anybody to do anything that I didn't do myself." So this is the life of St. John the Dwarf of Egypt, who lived long, long ago. Blessed be his memory. St. John the Dwarf, pray for us. Now, what am I supposed to do? Oh yeah, turn the computer off. Bye.